What's up guys, Justin here, and I want you to know something about me before we get started today. What you should know about me is that I love sports. Any other just general sports fans, like it doesn't matter if it's football, who loves football season? Oh, it doesn't matter if it's football, basketball, cornhole. I just love sports, right? So that's an important factor in this story I'm about to tell you. There was one time when I was a kid, I was watching SportsCenter, which is just a bunch of highlights and scores and all kinds of fun stuff. So I was watching SportsCenter, and SportsCenter, that episode just ended. And the next thing that popped up on my screen were the words, "World's Strongest Man Competition," okay? And little 8-year-old Justin is like,
I want to be the world's strongest man.
and so I was glued. I was glued to that screen for the next 2 hours. And what I proceeded to witness, one of the craziest things I've ever seen, is these Herculean men who are shaped like mountains, and they just proceeded to show off how strong they were. And it wasn't in like the normal way where they're just like doing push-ups for 2 hours. Like they are pulling planes on a rope, they're throwing boulders. It's insane. But the whole premise of this whole competition is, I'm gonna show you how strong I am. And I'm gonna show off to the world how strong I am. And today we're actually gonna talk about the exact opposite. We're gonna talk about how, as followers of Jesus, if you're following Jesus, we should be really, really good at showing off how weak we are. And it sounds even just a little uncomfortable saying it that way, but we're gonna talk about why that's important. And we also want to define weakness a little bit, because it's not like we're just gonna have a giant arm wrestling competition today and the one who loses the most is like, good job. No, because guys, weakness isn't just strong versus weak. Weakness is when we fall short of an expectation or a goal. See, weakness is when you're trying to do something, you're trying to accomplish something, and you just don't have what it takes. And ultimately, weaknesses come down to our imperfections. And yeah, we're gonna talk about how to show off that, our weaknesses, our imperfections. And to do that, I wanna look at a passage from a man by the name of Paul. He was writing to the church of Corinth. So we're gonna open up to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, picking up in verse 8. But before we read this, what you should know about Paul is that if there was a world's strongest man competition for faith, like they didn't measure muscles, they measured your faith, Paul would win every year. Like they would cancel it because it's just like, oh, Paul's here, he won, right? So that's Paul. He's one of the greatest pastors, missionaries, followers of Jesus in the history of the world. And so that's Paul, and that's who we're gonna be hearing from today. So we're gonna read in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, picking up in verse 8. Let's see what it says. Here's Paul writing to the church of Corinth. It says, 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. And each time the Lord said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weakness and in the insults, the hardships, the persecutions, and the troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Did you catch that? Paul, the Paul, is standing there saying, I wrestle with my imperfections. And he's even begging God, like, God, take them away. But what does God say? He says, you don't need perfection. You need me. You need my grace. And so I think about superhero movies, right? Every good superhero movie not only has a great hero, but there's a good, compelling villain with a compelling plan to take over the world, right? And at the right moment, in just the right time, the hero comes in with some antidote and says, not today, right? And saves the day. And in the story of our lives, guys, the antidote to our imperfection is God's grace. The counter to our imperfection is God's grace. You see, without it, we would be completely hopeless. And we would just live this hopeless, helpless life of misery, really. And yet, God decides to give us the gift of his grace. It says he extends his goodness to us and says, I know you don't deserve it, but that's grace. Grace is being given a gift that you don't deserve. And so God saves us from our misery, saves us from that helplessness by extending his goodness to us. And the really cool part about God's grace is God decided to give his grace a face when he sent his son Jesus. And so he sent his son Jesus to the earth to live a perfect life, to achieve the thing that we're talking about today that we can never achieve. Jesus did that, and he crushed it. He came and lived a perfect life, and yet the ultimate goal for Jesus' life on earth was to save you and to save me. And the way that he did that was by dying on the cross, dying the death that we all deserve because of our imperfections. Jesus, the perfect Son of God, he died that death, and because of that, we are able to wipe away our imperfection, trade our imperfection for Jesus' perfection. And another way of saying that, quite simply, is that our imperfection highlights our need for Jesus' perfection. And that's the whole reason Paul is standing there saying, brag about that. Tell the world you're imperfect, because it highlights the best thing about you, and that's that you need Jesus. We all need Jesus. Guys, that's why we should be proud in our weakness, because that's when Jesus shines the most. So I think the natural question now next is, how do we respond to God's grace with a face, and that's Jesus? How do we respond to this? Because we're all imperfect, and we're gonna stay imperfect, and so this is gonna be something we have to get good at responding to. And so how do we respond? And I think first and foremost, we respond by staying close to Jesus. I think that is so important as we wrestle with our imperfections, because it can be so easy to look in the mirror and see all the ways you've messed up and see all the ways you're imperfect. And I hope that we as a Collide family get really good at looking in the mirror and seeing Jesus. And looking in the mirror and saying, okay, I know without Jesus I'm not enough, but I have Jesus. And so that's what we see when we look in the mirror, becoming more and more like him. Will we ever be perfect? No. Guys, no one can be perfect, but we can all be better. And that happens by staying close to Jesus and growing in our relationship with him. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing and the third thing kind of go right hand in hand. So I'll talk about this all at the same time. The second thing is we have to have grace with ourselves. If God extends grace to us, we should extend grace to ourselves when we mess up. Because you are imperfect. We will make mistakes. So extend grace to yourself. This self-talk of, oh, you did it again, you're the worst, it's not helpful. It's not productive. And it's not from Jesus. And so leaning in and having grace with yourself. But then the exact other side of that coin is, if you're gonna have grace with yourself, you have to have grace with those around you as well. Because if you have a ton of grace with you and no grace with anybody else, you kind of just come across as a jerk. And so understanding that everyone around you, your friends, are human, I hope. The people around you, they're gonna make mistakes. And understanding that and having grace with them, and understanding not only that they are human, but understanding that they are who Jesus came and lived a perfect life for and died for as well, not just you. So understanding that the hard people in your life, Jesus loves them just the same way he loves you. And so he extended them grace, and so we should too. And so staying close to Jesus, having grace with yourself and having grace with those around you, I think is how this sets in, how this really becomes practical for us. And ultimately, Collide, here's what I hope, here's what I pray is true for us as a family. That we stop chasing perfection and start chasing Jesus. I love you guys, and we'll see you next time.